Good morning, everyone, and thank you for holding. Welcome to the Odontoprev presentation and discussion of the third quarter 2020 earnings. I'm Stella Hong, and today we have with us Mr. Rodrigo Barcela, our CEO, and Jose Roberto Pacheco, the IR officer. This webcast is only available online at www.odontoprev.com.br, where the respective presentation is also available. You can control the slide presentation. Next, we'll start the Q&A session in which questions should be sent via email to ri@odontoprev.com.br. This webcast is being recorded and will be available on Odontoprev's IR website in a couple of hours. Before proceeding, I'd like to clarify that any statements that are made during this webcast related to the company's business perspectives, operating and financial goals, and projections are based on the beliefs and assumptions of Odontoprev management as well as information currently available. Future considerations are not guarantees of performance as they involve risks, uncertainties, and assumptions as they refer to future events and therefore depend on circumstances that may or may not occur. Investors must understand that the overall economic conditions, industry conditions, and other operating factors could affect the future performance of the company and could lead to results that materially differ from those expressed in said future considerations. Now I'll turn the conference over to Jose Roberto Pacheco to begin the presentation. You may begin. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you very much for your interest and trust. We are Odontoprev. I would like to thank you for attending this webcast in a new format to present the results of the third quarter and first 9 months of 2020. Now, to begin the presentation on slide number 3, we can see data from ANS since 2006, where the dental plans and the industry was still young, presents continuous growth even during the difficult years of the recession, achieving now 26 million members. While the healthcare plans industry, which is more mature, has had the same number of members for almost a decade. On the next slide, slide number 4, now more specifically about 2020, we can see the growth picking up in additions in the healthcare industry following the declines caused by the pandemic and the consequent recession. When compared to June, the peak of the crisis, the medical plans have already grown by 187,000 lives, while dental plans in the same period added more than 500,000 new members. On our next slide, number 5, we can see the revenues and average ticket of the main healthcare plans in Brazil. In the last 12 months, ended in the first half year, we see Bradesco Saúde, Amil, and SulAmérica with outstanding revenue and average sales prices in line with high standards of delivery and excellence. On our next slide, number 6, we show the same framework for the main players in the dental industry, showing the Odontoprev portfolios in the corporate segments with more than 1 billion of an annualized portfolio and non-corporate with about 700 million BRLs in the last 12 months. On our next slide, number 7, similar to the rest of the industry, we've observed at Odontoprev a resumption in the growth of members. We ended the quarter, as you have seen, with an addition of 121,000 members. It was the best seasonal sales performance since 2011, particularly in the last month of September, as we will see on our next slide, number 18, with 33,000 new SME plans and 86,000 new individual plans after the months of the decrease since the beginning of the pandemic in April. On our next slide, number 9, we show the annual evolution of net revenue per business segment, which are quite different from each other. The highlight is the growing share of non-corporate plans with an average rate of annual organic growth of 15% in SME revenues and 21% in individual plan revenues in the past years. These levels are much higher than the industry and our main peers, which reinforces the beauty of strategy with profitability that is much higher to market levels. On slide 10, in 3Q20, we observed month after month a gradual resumption of frequency of use, resulting in a dental loss ratio of 40% in the quarter compared to 48% in 3Q19 and 33% in the last quarter, which was the beginning of the pandemic. On our next slide, number 11, the individual plan segment had a loss ratio of 41% in the quarter, counting on lower residual non-technical provisions of 4 million BRL in the quarter related to free choice of dentist plan in the bank channel. If we exclude these provisions, the dental loss ratio would have been 36% in the quarter. On the next slide, number 12, we have gains in efficiency with lower administrative expenses by 12 million in the quarter in these months of 2020. Among the positive highlights, we had lower post expenses and office rental costs across Brazil, in addition to lower costs with advertising. On the next slide, number 13, we see that bad debt was 3.2% in the quarter, lower than the levels in 2019, given the transition of the individual plans portfolio in recent years, moving from the traditional retail channels to the newer, more resilient and more profitable bank channels, which are Odontoprev exclusive partners. Moving on to cash generation, according to slide 14, we see that with the drop in the cost of services, the gains in administrative efficiency, lower bad debt, there's a natural increase of the adjusted EBITDA by 46%, with the margin increase from 20% to 31%. On the next slide, number 15, we see the historical perspective of annualized dental loss ratios since the IPO and also the EBITDA margin. It's worth noting the major predictability of the comeback of the company, a resilience of the unique business model, even in economic retraction cycles such as the current. On slide 16, in the 9 first months of the year, the company generated 407 million BRL in cash, already exceeding cash generation observed in 2019, ending the period with a net cash of 874 million BRL with no debt. Now moving on to the end of this quick presentation, as we see on slide 17, the evolution of net cash and the excess from solvency at the end of the quarter achieved 146 million BRL after the pioneer adherence in the market by Odontoprev to the new industry rules that enable to capture the stable regulatory capital. On slide 18, we see cash flows since the IPO and the discipline in capital allocation with the priority to compensate shareholders, especially through dividends. The dividends approved yesterday by the board of directors and cash dividends already paid totalize 100% payout in the quarter. We'd also like to highlight that we're very proud to see the growing number of individual shareholders, as you can see on slide 19, which is more than doubled in 2020, and the globalized shareholder base of the company, as our last slide, number 20, with 86% of the free float with investors from over 30 countries. Once again, we would like to thank everyone for their interest and trust in Odontoprev. Now, I'd like to hand over or begin the Q&A session in our regular practice of a 45-minute webcast. As Stella has already mentioned, please submit your questions by email to ri@odontoprev.com.br. Thank you very much, everyone. Now we'll begin the Q&A session. As Pacheco mentioned, if you have any questions, please send them to the email. Our first question is from Leandro Bastos from Citi. He's saying that the words were positive in all categories. And how do you feel and the direction for 2021? Good morning, Leandro. Welcome to the call. Thank you for your question. As you've highlighted, we had a growth in the quarter in all segments and channels demonstrating the recovery. That's closely connected to the flexibilization in relation to the pandemic, opening shopping malls, the banking branches are operating again. So I believe that that's because of the resumption of sales activities. And that's very positive. It's coming back in an interesting rate that we can follow. And how we see the fourth quarter, and your question about 2021, right? If we would dare to comment, we're optimistic about the fourth quarter. We'll see how this recovery behaves, if it does, if it doesn't. But without a doubt, the government injecting money was very positive to that. But we're being cautiously optimistic. And for 2021, I think we'll have a better idea in December. I think it's still early to say anything about 2021. Thank you. Our next question is from Roberto from Merrill Lynch. She's also talking about strong growth of members that we've had in the last quarters in the SME segment. And he's asking, what's the maturity of the product channel category? What should we expect? Good morning, Roberto. Thank you. An important thing. Well, these things are a reflection. The company never stopped working with or without pandemic. We're working hard to build solutions that would provide facilities for our commercial partners, our brokers, and the bank channels, and also facilities for our members. So what we see now is not because of a specific action in the quarter, but actually a reflection of many improvements and innovations that the company is always having and in order to provide. In SME, as you're asking specifically about that area, we had solutions for apps where sales at the end are much easier. It flows better, capturing and signing and simulating. Everything's easier. Another interesting thing, but now thinking of product, not just in technology improvements, but considering product, we had a sub-segmentation in the SME segment. So it's usually from 3 to 199 members. The behavior is different in a company with 4 or 5 members compared to a company with 150 members. So we've sub-segmented that with specific products and pricing. Therefore, it's a result of continuous work that the company has always been doing and focusing on and using intelligence to understand distribution channel, the end users. That's what we see is a result of what we've seen in previous quarters. Thank you. Now going into corporate plans. I guess there was a question about how to win back these plans. Mauricio, good morning. From what I mentioned in the previous question is we're winning back always. So in corporate, sometimes that starts off 8 months before the members come in. So we can't just consider one quarter for that. Oh, they did something different in that quarter. We're always implementing solutions and innovations and facilities and strong commercial contact and interesting commercial planning, sales planning. And with that, we reap the results throughout the period. I think it's worth noting, though, the improvement in terminations. We had 2 months as of April were heavy terminations, and then in August and September, that was lower in relation to terminations. So in this quarter, I believe there are sales efforts that, as a general rule, started 8 months before, even in the implementation of lives, and the other side helping a little when it stopped bleeding, right? So we didn't have job recoveries, but at least we stopped the bleeding, and that's very important. Thank you. Now about non-corporate. Marisa Cepera from Credit Suisse is asking about Bradesco's role in the non-corporate group. What can we expect moving forward? The role is fundamental. Think of the customer base that the bank has and how it's disseminated around Brazil and the strength of distribution, be it through the actual bank, the brokerage. So it's a huge benefit of having that kind of partner like Bradesco in distribution. We can expect a growing movement. I believe that the development of apps such as the one that I mentioned for brokers is interesting, and it benefits them directly and their distribution. So we can expect traction being achieved, and that makes us very optimistic. Pacheco, would you like to say a few words on that? That point is very important that Sapera is mentioning. Right, Rodrigo, it's the share of Disco Dental. It's dominating in the SME portfolio. The ticket is higher than corporate. That portfolio has a higher addressable market than the traditional corporate market. And through that, and especially through the Bradesco Dental brand, the company was able to bring in the past 5 years, the growth of 50% in MSME on average. So the portfolio has a higher average ticket with higher returns compared to the market and a potential size that's very expressive through the bank channels. And particularly, the company has the privilege of having the two largest bank assurance channels, Bradesco, and in Latin America, Bradesco and Banco do Brazil. So we can achieve 1 million members with a portfolio that's, above all, very resilient. It already presents clear signs of recovery and, in a way, disconnected to the job movement and GDP movement. So it's a potential market that's really interesting for us, especially in the company's strategic plan for the next years. The SME is a highlight. And as Rodrigo mentioned, the bank channels and the company partners, and with a long-term commitment, without a doubt, are a fundamental element for us to develop and support that type of portfolio more and more. And still, members, I'm going to compile 3 questions that we received from the retail channel in individual plans. They're asking or saying that there was a quick, the retail channel was faster. Is it our action? Did we launch cheaper products, or was it a stronger demand? What exactly was the reason for that? The retail channel was probably the ones that were most affected, among the most affected, or the most affected, was closed 6 or 7 months. But now we've observed that the dental product is easy to sell, easy to use, easy to understand. So after shopping centers were allowed to open again, there was a repressed demand on the customer side. There was also the will to offer that product through those channels. So now what we see is the repressed demand. Customers that weren't going to these places with that repressed demand, and the channels on the other side that wanted to offer the product and meet customers' needs. So in general, in summary, that's what we've observed. I'd like to comment as well in relation to individual plans. Actually, they were highly affected by the pandemic. So there was a lot of rejection in the past quarter, the second quarter. And now the effect is quite the opposite. Now that stores are opening back again, the shopping malls, as Rodrigo mentioned, and even the bank channels, now the company has seen this recovery in individual plans in a more constructive manner. And you've observed that. We disclose month by month in each of the months, 6 months, the net additions. And in September, that's very clear that we have the highest number of additions in the third quarter. Once again, that makes us cautiously optimistic for future quarters. But if we can count on the traditional growth in the corporate market plus new growth in hard to be shown in small and medium-sized companies, and then also counting on many different distribution channels, not just the traditional retail stores, but also channels that are connected to department stores, and also, and mainly, this new, more profitable portfolio that's more resilient and visible, which is the bank shareholder portfolio. So that's a very important strategic transition that increases the profitability of individual plans. It's very high to be replicated by the competition, and therefore that enables us to have tickets that are 4 or 5 times higher than what the competition would obtain. And as we've observed, the revenue in individual plans in the company are greater than the revenues of any direct competitor in their total portfolio of members. We are very well positioned to capture the many different opportunities across Brazil in the entire market segment, as well as being supported by a distribution platform with no one equal to that in Brazil. Next question is from Joseph Giordano from JP Morgan. He's asking about individual members. What has been the behavior in October in sales? When we see the average ticket, what kind of profile for new sales? Is there any difference in sales performance according to the different regions? That's a good point. The individual plan portfolio has been changing throughout time. In the past, it was mainly originated specifically 10 years ago in department stores. And now you don't see a higher presence, or actually you see a higher presence of plans originated in bank channels. Another important thing that we've been anticipating to the market is a higher possibility that Odontoprev has to have more mainstream products, such as lower cost. Everybody remembers when we acquired Odonto System, their model was very specific with low loss ratio and low cost. And gradually, we are already present, and we're starting this launch in the Southeast, particularly São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Minas Gerais in some specific places. So that diversification is very important. And the question is for October. Usually we don't comment the month that we're in, or the perspectives that the company expects for the upcoming quarters, but it's important to say that the company does believe or expect for the next years a diversification of individual plans. We started off in individual plans with higher tickets for classes A and B, but yes, gradually at a national level and creating this dentist network, we plan on working on many different distribution channels simultaneously. And that would lead to interesting volumes and diversification in the source of revenue, not necessarily based on tickets, but also based on volume with different profitability. We know as you know, the company is focused on value and not volume, and that's the fundamentals of the strategic plan in individual plans for the upcoming years. And in line with what you just answered, we can address these two questions, one from Marcia from Santander and the other one from Joseph Giordano from JP Morgan, where Marcio is asking if we have any updates on the launch of lower ticket plans, and Giordano's asking about the trend of the average ticket, because we've seen a drop in the past quarters. Can we see any strategic changes on the company side in relation to members and ticket? To start answering, we have to remember is that at lower costs in times, and that's very natural. It happens in the corporate market where the company would have lower tickets with higher profitability. So there's a very direct correlation in the long-term contracts between the behavior of average ticket connected to cost behavior. It's notable that in 2020, the company, the industry, has faced lower costs. Therefore, it's natural that we would also have lower tickets, enabling stable margins focused in the long term. In individual plans, it's no different. So that's also the reality for individual plans. And we should highlight in time with the continuous launch of products that are affordable or mainstream products. So the company in time will be able to show many different profiles for individual plans that will exist as part of the portfolio. And in relation to the strategy that will be very multi-distribution focused on many different markets, given the robustness and size of exclusive distribution channels that the company has. Rodrigo, would you like to talk about the Odonto system rollout and Odonto system model? Just to add, Pacheco, you explained that very well. We're bringing in the Odonto system model. We already have customers and sales taking place as part of the company portfolio. We have the Prevent, that's the more premium, Bradesco Dental, Baby Dental Odonto system, the first access. So we have a very robust portfolio of products, and we have to orchestrate that throughout Brazilian territory. Our brands with their different types of products and distribution channels, so we can service each one of the customer segments that we have. And that process is there. We'll see even more. One profile may move more than the other or plan. That's normal when we introduce new plans in new regions. That's what I wanted to add. Thank you. That was perfect, Pacheco. Our next questions are about corporate tickets. Roberto Otero from Merrill Lynch is asking, how is the average ticket behaving in relation to gross additions? What can we expect in the average ticket and the inflections of net additions in corporate mainly results from churn or the acceleration of gross sales? I'd also like to add the question from Marcia from Santander about corporate ticket, where he's asking about price adjustments, price increases for 2021. Is there a risk of drop given the lower loss ratio in 2020? Basically, we have two topics, the profile of the additions and the behavior of average ticket. In corporate, as we've already mentioned before, it's very important to say that the average ticket in contracts is connected to loss dental ratio. So in environments with a lower dental loss ratio, it's normal to have a distribution part of the value generation and sharing that with customers in a long-term relationship. So the average ticket has been lower, yes, in 2020, and it's proportional to the behavior of costs. It's natural that in 2021 we would expect a dental loss ratio closer to historical records, and recovery of the average ticket at the same speed. So that's an important point. Now, the portfolio has been very resilient, and that's a very important characteristic in 2020 in the corporate segment, to observe the resilience of contracts. So even with some level of unemployment, the company was able to attract new contracts at competitive prices and attractive margins. Once again, difficult to be delivered by the competition, as dental isn't their first value or offer. But given the fact that we're 100% dedicated to dental and all the contracts aim at generating value in the long term, and with that strategy, we were able to have most of our revenues in cash generation, given the very specific aspect in the competition that's focused on other business segments and not necessarily dental. So to summarize, I'd say that the vision for 2021 is a dental loss ratio going back to historical patterns, different than what we've seen in 2020, and that will have a direct impact in the possibility of adjusting tickets, especially in the corporate market, given that that's still the main market for the company and portfolio, and very important, will still be very important next year. Now, the last two questions about ticket before we go into Jennifer Madigan Stanley is asking, the individual ticket also suffered. Is that because of the mix in the different banks or because of cheaper products? In parallel to that, Marcos from Santander is also asking if the company doesn't plan on reviewing the strategy of individual plans in the retail channel given the low profitability of that channel. Those are very true and interesting points in the strategy of approaching the individual plans. Yes, that's true. In the past months, we had an important increase in the retail segment that has a ticket that's lower than the bank channel. So that's the main reason why we had a lower average ticket in the quarter. That doesn't mean that in the 2021 vision, for instance, that there's no perspective of growth. And what we will balance out in 21. So the growth of retail that has a lower ticket compared to the bank channel, the launch of new products for access that also has lower tickets, and then that should generate a relevant volume and enable us to balance out the growth of revenue in individual plans that certainly are above the market and above the actual corporate portfolio in general terms. And the growth of individual plans was over 20% per year in the past 5 years. So it's a strategic portfolio of big interest for the company. So we will diversify and launch new products more and more from products that for access mainstream through the Odonto system model throughout Brazil, not just the Northeast, but also exploring the digital bank channels and retail channels that are working with us, but always focused on and aiming on value and healthy margins. Now, about dental loss ratio, we have some questions from the analyst. One is from Marisa Sapir from Credit Suisse. How is the ramp up of DLR at the end of the third quarter at the beginning of the fourth? What do you expect us to get back to normal? Will we have normal? And he also asked if the authorization requests have been greater, and what's the percentage of non-serviced requests? About the claims, or DLR, we monitor that on a daily basis. We have meetings every day where we call it approval of requests. So when it went down to almost zero during the first week of the lockdown, it was slowly rising already had 87% of our customer base serviced in urgencies and emergencies. We set up the tele guidance and dental. That was very important for the first step, right, to see if the customer actually had to go to the dentist with all the social isolation and concerns. So first we see measures so that members would not make sure they would get service, be it remotely or in person in emergencies or urgencies. And then the recovery, the opening up of the economy. So we go from zero, and then in the last 12 weeks, we've seen a very stable pattern with from 9 to 12% lower than what would be normal for each of these periods. Our best impression and estimates today is that today, by the end of the year, that should continue. We still have about 10% of people that are avoid consultations and so on. Some may be using the dental teleconsults. So, and that could be positive. That could be adopted more and more. People are trusting in that more and more, that they can have a first visit with the video call, as it's our video call right now, safe and transparent. So one part because of that, and the other part because of the risk group that are afraid of exposing themselves. So by December, we believe that the behavior that we've seen in the past 12 weeks should remain. So it's about 9 to 12% lower than what we would expect would be the average of 2 months. Next year, we have to see what's going to happen with the vaccines. I believe by December, we should have a better idea to know what's going to happen in 2021. In general, that's been the behavior, and that's what we expect, and it has already started this quarter. Rodrigo, as you mentioned about the teledental, Mariana is asking about that, for if there's going to be an online trend of screening, lowering the number of DL visits. Thank you for your question. I think so. Yeah, we've seen already over 6,000 patients with teledental. So it's important that first visit, it's about giving them guidance. So if through a tip of using a specific product, or let's say an anti-inflammatory or toothpaste, and that will help, or to refer them to the right specialist, that's a huge gain, because you're already directing them to the one that really understands that has to be treated. Or you're having a visit, avoiding a visit just by treating them, if it's a pill or something. So we believe that will gain traction. I think the pandemic really helped in that sense, in relation to trusting digital and video. I think that would be important. We can coexist with that, with a way of people adapting to that and accepting it even more in the virtual consults. There's a lot of benefits, not only for patients, but also for the company's DLR. I think that without a doubt, an important part of that is here to stay. Also for DLR, but also talking about provisions for individual plans. Samuel from BTG is asking if there's any risk of additional non-technical provisions in the free choice plans in the individual segment. The non-technical provisions in individual plans that began in 3Q19 and is becoming lower and lower quarter after quarter. In the third quarter, it was no different. We still have a small portfolio of free choice individual plans in the bank channel that are entitled to treatment that could take place at the end of the year, beginning of the next year. There's small provisions, residual provisions. That's a relevant planning for 2021 and a significant. We don't say significant for 2021. About expenses, Leandro Bastos from City is asking the dilution that we had in sales expenses and SG&A in the third quarter, is that a one-off effect, or is there a dynamic to follow? Could you also address the trend in bad debt? Leandro, let me start, and then I'll hand over to Pacheco, but I believe he has something to say about that. As I mentioned, the teledebt, we've learned to do many other things in a digital manner. We have an important operation in the company that you know, which is the companies that have the enrollment plans as well as churn, the employees that are terminated and then come back. So we go back to talk about the products and oral health in these companies. We've learned that we can educate in companies and get more contracts in a digital manner. So we've been very successful in using this kind of system, this kind of technology that we're using right now to do that. So we're saving on hotel, transportation, travel. It's also safer for our employees that don't have to go back and forth all the time. So a large number of that, the savings that we were able to achieve during the pandemic, part of that will definitely be included in our new practices. So that's also here to stay. As the example of the teledental, and we're already planning for 2021 how we can make this a permanent gain. Now I'm going to hand over to Pacheco. We did have some one-off gains. The volume of travel is atypical. It's going to be very low. And we also had some permanent gains. All the rentals of the sales offices in Brazil were renegotiated. So we had permanent important gains in that. Digital processes and processes to implement a number of robots. So the company robotization is in constant activity in many different areas. Implementation of AI in some clinical audit processes is already at an interesting stage and has enabled us to have savings as well. So in general terms, Leandro, the digital world is a very important thing for the company. And we definitely had important progress this year that translated into a G&A ratio that was lower compared to previous years. That's not over yet, and we're looking for more scalability in the upcoming years. The next question is from Solvency, from Merrill Lynch, giving the perspective of cash generation. What do you expect as an average payout from now on? We had received good regulatory news in April. The company was a pioneer in adopting the RN451, which is a possibility from the national agency in Brazil, giving the players in the industry and freezing the solvency margin at a level of 75%. That will be valid until the end of 2022, giving us stable regulatory capital. Therefore, the extra cash generation can be distributed to the market. And the payout, that is why the payout of the first half was 50% and now goes to 85-90% in the second quarter. And now, as everybody saw, it's achieving 100% in the third quarter. The company is a traditional dividend player, and for the upcoming years, we would count on the distribution of most of the result, why not all of it, quarter by quarter. First of all, through cash dividends and interest on capital. So we do recognized as a company that is in line with capital allocation in a very clear manner in relation to shareholders. Our last question about growth in 2021 is from Vinicius Ribeiro from UBS. Considering that the macroeconomy doesn't recover as fast as we thought, how should we see growth and margins in relation to Odontoprev? In that case, what kind of initiatives can you adapt to guarantee that you'll have the share of recipes? If the base case is a stronger macro, what are your expectations? About 21, an important tone that I've been mentioning since the beginning of the call. You see the result of one quarter as actually it was a result of the seeds we planted way back. So developing tools, planning, among other things. We have to do what we master and what we can command. So there are a number of variables that we do not control. The virus, for instance. So what do we do internally? I believe that it's heavy, tough sales work, planning, by fully understanding consumers and the distribution channel, and a constant pursuit to develop tools that would provide facilities, efficiency, and I'll give you an example for members, anything that can make their lives easier so they can use the app to contact us. And with a decision tree, they can say what kind of pain they feel, if it's hot, when it's hot, when it's cold, if it only hurts every now and then. And that decision tree can understand the possibilities about the problem and recommend, oh, you may have this, therefore you should see this dentist, and even more. Since you're at this location right now, through georeferencing, these are the dentists in your area. Would you like to schedule a consult? And so it's kind of roadmap for the customer. So we're always considering development, innovation all the time. That's something we can control. Taking the highest quality service always, that's something we will always offer our members. Take good care of our brands and distribution channels, and then there's the external factor, that it's just going to be what it's going to be. So we work hard to evolve in all those fronts. In 2021, we'll see what the external factors will show. But as the pandemic brought in a number of difficulties, but we adjusted through innovation and also repressed demand of technology to get through this weird phase that we're going through in the pandemic. We do have an ability of identifying the dangers, the hazards, modeling that, and answer to all of that, respond to all of that. Shika, would you like to add? I'd like to leave you with an optimistic message. Our role is to be innovative. And once again, as Rodrigo mentioned, take quality level to all of Brazil and in all market segments. In 2020, when you stop to think of it and analyze it, in the first quarter, we had the best sales performance in the past years. And that's happening again in the third quarter. The exception was the beginning of the pandemic, which was the second quarter. So I do believe that we have an opportunity, especially in the better macro scenario in 2021, in all market segments across Brazil, counting on these leading brands that Odontoprev has and the bank channels. You can expect value generation, organic growth, and maybe even inorganic in the digital partnerships in person and in person. We are really excited, and I'd like to leave you with an optimistic message this year in 2021. Let's hold your horses because we still have another quarter before 2021 to bring in results. I'd like to thank everyone for taking part in this first event with images since our IPO in 2006. This is a great opportunity for everyone to share with us and see the behavior in this 90-day period and how we see the company moving forward. It was a pleasure to be here with you. Thank you very much, and I'll see you at our next meeting.